Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that someone secretly took 10% of the money from your wallet. You would be furious. You would call the police. You would want answers. But what if I told you that something very similar happens every year, and most people never notice it? The thief does not wear a mask. The thief does not break into your house. The thief does not even touch your bank account. Yet somehow your money buys less, your savings lose power, and the price of everything around you keeps climbing. That thief is called inflation. Think about this. A few years ago, you could walk into a store with $100 and leave with a cart full of groceries. Today, that same $100 feels smaller. The money looks identical. The number on the bill has not changed, but its power has. That is what makes inflation so dangerous. It is invisible. Most people blame expensive products, greedy companies, bad luck, or random events. But very few stop and ask the real question. Why does money itself keep losing value? In this video, we are going to uncover how inflation works, why governments tolerate it, who benefits from it, who gets hurt by it, and most importantly, how you can stop being its victim. Most people think inflation means prices going up. That is only half the story. Rising prices are the symptom. Inflation is the disease behind it. Imagine a small island with 1,000 apples and $1,000. Each apple costs $1. Simple. Now imagine someone magically prints another $1,000 while the number of apples stays exactly the same. Suddenly there are $2,000 chasing 1,000 apples. What happens next? Apples become more expensive. The apples did not change. The dollars changed. This is the first big idea you need to understand. Inflation is often not about things becoming more valuable. It is about money becoming less valuable. When central banks increase the money supply, more currency enters the system. People have more money to spend. Businesses see higher demand. Prices start rising. Eventually, everyone notices that life costs more. This is why your grandparents often tell stories about buying meals, houses, or cars for prices that sound impossible today. The products changed a little. The money changed a lot. Inflation works slowly. That is why it is difficult to notice. Nobody wakes up to 50% inflation overnight in normal economies. Instead, prices creep upward year after year until one day you look back and realize your purchasing power has been cut dramatically. The scary part is that even low inflation compounds. Just like investments grow through compound interest, inflation grows through compound damage. A small percentage repeated every year becomes a huge loss over decades. Here is where things become interesting. If inflation quietly reduces the value of money, why do governments and central banks allow it? Why not keep inflation at zero forever? The official answer is that a small amount of inflation encourages spending and investment. If people expect prices to rise slightly in the future, they are more likely to buy things today. Businesses expand, consumers spend, economic activity increases. But there is another reason: debt. Governments around the world owe enormous amounts of money. When inflation rises, the real value of that debt falls over time. Imagine owing someone $100,000. If inflation cuts purchasing power in half over the next 20 years, repaying that debt becomes much easier. Inflation acts like a hidden debt reduction machine. This is one reason economists often describe inflation as a silent tax. Nobody receives a bill, nobody votes on it directly. Yet holders of cash slowly lose purchasing power while borrowers benefit. Governments are usually the biggest borrowers in the economy. That does not mean inflation is some giant conspiracy. It means policymakers often view moderate inflation as a useful tool. They would rather have 2% inflation than a frozen economy. The problem is that inflation rarely behaves exactly as planned. Once inflation starts accelerating, controlling it becomes extremely difficult. History is full of examples where governments believed inflation was manageable right up until it became a crisis. Not everyone experiences inflation the same way. If you live paycheck to paycheck, inflation can feel brutal. Rent rises, food rises, transportation rises, utilities rise. Meanwhile, your salary often moves much slower. Every month becomes a race. The biggest victims are usually savers. Imagine spending years building a cash emergency fund. You make sacrifices. You avoid unnecessary purchases. You do everything responsibly, then inflation arrives. Your bank pays 1% interest while inflation runs at 6%. On paper, your account balance grows. In reality, your purchasing power shrinks. You are moving backward while standing still. Retirees can also suffer heavily because many rely on fixed incomes. If living expenses rise faster than their income, their standard of living declines every year. Meanwhile, people who own assets often experience something completely different. Stocks, real estate, businesses, and other assets frequently rise in value during inflationary periods. Their wealth grows while cash holders fall behind. This creates one of the biggest wealth gaps in modern economies. Those who own assets often get richer. Those who rely only on wages and savings often struggle. Inflation does not affect everyone equally. It quietly transfers purchasing power from one group to another. Now we arrive at a question that surprises many people. If inflation hurts cash, what do wealthy people do? The answer is simple. They avoid holding large amounts of cash. The wealthy understand that money sitting still is slowly melting. Instead of storing most of their wealth in cash, they buy productive assets. Stocks represent ownership in businesses. Real estate produces rent. Businesses generate profits. Even when inflation rises, these assets often adjust with the economy. Think about a landlord. If inflation increases, rents usually rise over time. Think about a company. If costs increase, businesses often raise prices. The asset adapts. Cash does not. This is why many millionaires and billionaires treat cash like a temporary parking lot rather than a long-term strategy. They use money to buy assets. Then they allow those assets to grow faster than inflation. This is one reason the rich often become richer during inflationary periods. They own things that benefit from rising prices, while average households hold a larger percentage of their wealth in cash. The game is not really about money. The game is about ownership. People focus on earning dollars. The wealthy focus on owning assets that produce dollars. Inflation affects more than your grocery bill. It changes behavior. People become less willing to save because savings lose value. Investors take greater risks searching for returns. Workers demand higher wages. Businesses raise prices. Governments spend more. Everything becomes connected. Inflation also changes psychology. When people expect prices to rise, they begin making decisions differently. They rush purchases. They worry about future costs. They become more sensitive to economic news. This can create a cycle. Fear of inflation causes behavior that contributes to inflation. History provides extreme examples. In some countries, people rushed to spend money immediately after receiving it because waiting even a few weeks meant losing purchasing power. Money became something to escape rather than something to save. Fortunately, most modern economies never reach those extremes. But the principle remains the same. The value of money depends heavily on trust. When people trust that money will maintain purchasing power, economies function smoothly. When that trust weakens, economic behavior changes dramatically. Inflation is not just a financial phenomenon. It is a psychological phenomenon. It influences how entire societies think about work, saving, spending, and the future. So what is the lesson? Inflation is not a temporary annoyance. It is a permanent force. The goal is not to complain about it. The goal is to understand it. First, keep enough cash for emergencies, but do not assume cash alone will build long-term wealth. Second, learn about investing. Index funds, businesses, real estate, and other productive assets have historically provided protection against inflation over long periods. Third, focus on increasing your skills and income. The ability to earn more remains one of the strongest defenses against rising costs. Fourth, think in terms of purchasing power rather than dollar amounts. A larger bank balance means nothing if it buys less every year. Most importantly, remember this. Inflation does not steal your money all at once. It steals tiny pieces over long periods of time. That is why it is so difficult to notice. And that is exactly why understanding it gives you an advantage. The people who understand inflation make different decisions. They save differently. They invest differently. They think differently. The invisible thief will always be there. The question is whether you let it keep taking from you, or whether you learn how the game works and start protecting yourself. Because in the end, the biggest financial risk is not inflation itself. The biggest risk is not understanding it.